The 25 Most Amazing Paintings by Raphael Sanzio. Number 25. Portrait of Bindo Altaviti, circa 1515. During the 16th century, the portrait took on an unprecedented value in Renaissance society, reflecting not only the status of the sitter but also his intellect and character. Portrait of Bindo Altaviti, painted by Raphael Sanzio around 1515 AD, is a supreme example of this genre. Bindo Altaviti, a banker of Florentine origin established in Rome, was an influential figure in the financial world and a notable patron of the arts. His portrait departs from the conventions of static and solemn representation of the time, displaying an intimacy and liveliness that reveal the artist's virtuosity. In a society where personal image was key in the projection of power and influence, Raphael manages to convey not only the youth and beauty of the sitter, but also his refinement and intellectual status. Technically, the painting is a display of painterly sensitivity and mastery of chiaroscuro. The light gently shapes the young banker's face, highlighting the delicacy of his features with a precision that recalls the meticulousness of Leonardo da Vinci. The blonde hair, worked with fine brushstrokes, and the melancholic gaze that projects beyond the viewer give the portrait an emotional intensity unusual for the time. The dark background contrasts with the luminosity of the face, further highlighting its presence. The twist of the body and the natural gesture of the head suggest a captured moment, an approach that would profoundly influence the evolution of the portrait in Western painting. Raphael Sanzio, at the height of his career in Rome, here demonstrates his ability to imbue his figures with palpable humanity without sacrificing the idealization characteristic of the High Renaissance. Often misattributed to Titian in the past, this work is one of the most refined expressions of psychological portraiture in Renaissance painting. What is most intriguing is that, although a private commission, Altaviti's portrait would end up being rediscovered centuries later as a visual testament to the cultural and financial splendor of 16th century Rome, where art and economic power went hand in hand. Number 24. La Vellata, from 1515 to 1516. At the height of his artistic maturity, Raphael Sanzio painted La Vellata, one of his most sublime depictions of female beauty and his absolute mastery of portraiture. In the 16th century, the painting of idealized figures reached its zenith with artists such as Raphael, who managed to balance naturalism with ideal perfection. This work, executed between 1515 and 1516 AD, is a testament to his ability to capture grace and refinement in his sitters. The woman depicted is thought to be the same model who inspired his La Fornerina, possibly Margherita Luti, although the exact identity remains a matter of debate. Regardless of her identity, La Vellata stands as a paradigm of the Renaissance feminine ideal. In technical terms, the painting is an example of mastery in the handling of light and color. The woman's face, of extraordinary delicacy, is modeled with subtle transitions of shadows that give it an almost sculptural volume. Her gaze, serene but profound, creates an immediate connection with the viewer. The richness of the fabrics, especially the white cloth that gives the work its name, demonstrates Raphael's ability to represent textures with unparalleled precision. The gilding of the dress, worked with a loose but meticulous brushstroke, reflects the influence of Venetian portraits, although with the unmistakable Roman delicacy that defines his style. This work not only represents a technical achievement, but also symbolizes the Renaissance concept of the donna ideale, in which external beauty is a reflection of internal virtue. Raphael, at the height of his talent, achieved here a balance between realism and aesthetic sublimation that would influence generations of later artists. Curiously, The painting was highly appreciated from its creation and never fell into oblivion, being kept in private collections until it entered the most prestigious museums. Its impeccable conservation over the centuries allows it to continue to transmit today with the same intensity the ideal of beauty and harmony that Raphael raised to perfection. Number 23. The Ecstasy of Saint Cecilia. 1516. In the 16th century, in the city of Bologna, Raphael Sanzio created the Ecstasy of Saint Cecilia, one of his most moving religious paintings. This work was commissioned for the Church of San Giovanni in Monte, reflecting the strong rise of spirituality at the time, especially within the Bolognese school. The painting depicts Saint Cecilia in a state of divine rapture, surrounded by saints such as Saint Paul, Saint John the Evangelist, Saint Augustine, and Mary Magdalene. This composition not only highlights Raphael's anatomical and compositional knowledge, but also reflects his evolution towards a more mature and expressive style. From a technical point of view, this work stands out for its mastery of color and its enveloping atmosphere. Raphael used a soft light that bathes the characters, creating an almost palpable feeling of spirituality. The perspective and the distribution of the figures reveal the influence of Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, but with Raphael's personal stamp, a perfect harmony in the arrangement of the elements. At the feet of Saint Cecilia, a set of broken musical instruments symbolizes the transition from the earthly to the divine, a visual resource that enriches the depth of the message. Throughout history, this painting has been admired for its ability to capture the saint's transcendental emotion. It was taken to Paris during the Napoleonic campaigns, but later returned to Bologna, where it remains in the Pinacoteca Nazionale. The influence of Renaissance classicism can be perceived in its chromatic palette and in the gestures of the characters, with an idealized beauty that has made this work one of Raphael's most emblematic works. In particular, the expression of Saint Cecilia, with her eyes turned to heaven and an unwavering serenity, has been a model of reference for many later artists. Number 22. Madonna di Foligno. From 1511 to 1512. Between 1511 and 1512, Raphael Sanzio painted Madonna di Foligno, one of his most monumental compositions in the field of sacred conversations. This work was commissioned by Sigismondo de' Conti, secretary of Pope Julius II, as a form of gratitude for having survived a lightning strike at his home in Foligno. The painting was originally conceived for the Church of Santa Maria in Araceli in Rome and later moved to the Basilica of San Francesco in Foligno, which gave it its present name. The painting shows the Madonna and Child enthroned on a bank of clouds, surrounded by Saint John the Baptist, Saint Francis of Assisi, Saint Jerome, and Sigismondo de' Conti himself, who appears in an attitude of prayer. Raphael used a pyramidal composition, with a detailed study of the gestures and gazes that direct attention towards the celestial figure. The use of light and color lend an ethereal character to the scene, while the presence of a child angel in the center adds a point of visual balance. The precision with which Raphael worked the faces and clothing reveals his extraordinary mastery of drawing and his ability to bring each character to life. Over the centuries, this painting has been valued for its dynamism and innovative treatment of space. Rather than using an architectural background, Raphael opted for an open landscape, reinforcing the sense of spaciousness and transcendence. During the Napoleonic invasion, the work was taken to Paris, although it later returned to Italy, where it is now in the Vatican museums. A fascinating detail is the inclusion of a disk of light at the bottom of the painting, which has been interpreted by some scholars as an allusion to an extraordinary celestial phenomenon. Number 21. Madonna dell'Impanata. from 1513 to 1514. In 1513 to 14, Raphael Sanzio executed Madonna dell'Impanata, one of his most refined creations in the Marian genre. This work is named after the window with waxed cloth, impanata, in the background of the composition, an architectural detail that reinforces the sense of depth and realism. Commissioned in the context of Papal Rome, the painting reflects Raphael's stylistic maturity in the last decade of his life, when his work reached exceptional expressiveness and dynamism. The scene depicts the Virgin and Child in an intimate and secluded setting. Next to them are Saint Elizabeth, Saint John the Baptist as a child, and Saint Catherine of Alexandria, who is holding a wheel, her iconographic symbol. Raphael achieves a perfect balance between the divine and the human, endowing the characters with a surprising naturalness. The figures' gestures establish a network of visual interactions that guide the viewer's gaze through the composition. The artist's mastery is evident in the softness of the contours, the treatment of the folds in the fabrics, and the subtle gradation of the colors. This work has been the subject of numerous studies due to its unusual composition and iconographic richness. It is believed to have been completed with the collaboration of his workshop, especially by Giulio Romano, his most prominent disciple. Today, the painting is kept in the Palatine Gallery of the Pitti Palace in Florence, where it remains one of the most admired pieces of the Renaissance. One detail that does not go unnoticed is the gaze between Saint Elizabeth and the little Saint John, which seems to contain a premonitory message about the child's future as the precursor of Christ. Number 20. The Three Graces. From the year 1504 to the year 1505. In the middle of the 16th century, Raphael Sanzio, still young but already with unrivaled pictorial skill, created the Three Graces, a work that captures the harmony and delicacy of the Renaissance ideal. Inspired by classical mythology and the representation of the goddesses of beauty, the painter managed to capture the elegance of the human body with exceptional virtuosity. The theme of the three linked female figures comes from the Greco-Latin tradition, but Raphael endows it with a chromatic softness and anatomical precision that enhance the sensation of movement and fluidity. His study of ancient sculpture is evident in the naturalness of the poses and the subtle interaction between the figures, where light and shadow are masterfully distributed to accentuate their forms. This painting is a clear reflection of Raphael's technical mastery, who at this stage of his career had already developed a refined style, influenced by Perugino but with its own identity. The composition is balanced in a perfect triangle, with an exquisite tonal transition that gives depth to the scene. The warmth of the color palette and the meticulous representation of the figure's skin give a sensation of almost palpable touch, something uncommon in the art of the period. In addition, the fusion between the landscape in the background and the characters in the foreground creates a feeling of continuity, expanding the dimension of the work and achieving a surprising visual harmony. One of the most fascinating aspects of this piece is its probable connection to the court of Urbino, where humanist influence encouraged the study of classical antiquity. This depiction of idealized beauty had a significant impact on the development of Renaissance art, consolidating Raphael as a master in the representation of grace and formal perfection. The painting, although inspired by the Greco-Latin tradition, possesses a unique freshness that maintains it as one of the most iconic images in the Western artistic canon. Number 19. Vision of a Night, 1504. In 1504, at the height of the Italian Renaissance, Raphael Sanzio painted one of his first masterpieces, Vision of a Night. Despite its small format, this painting contains powerful symbolism and compositional depth that reveals the artist's early talent. The scene depicts a young knight dozing under a tree, while two female figures emerge at his sides offering him different attributes, a sword and a book. This duality has been interpreted as the choice between the life of virtue and that of pleasure, a theme of great importance in 16th-century humanist philosophy. The composition of the work is symmetrical and meticulously balanced, with a landscape in the background that provides a sense of serenity and spatial depth. Despite his youth, Raphael demonstrates an absolute mastery of color and light, using a soft palette that gives the scene a dreamlike and contemplative air. The carefully detailed clothing of the figures reflects the influence of his teacher Perugino, but with a greater fluidity in the lines and a naturalness that anticipates his artistic maturity. The choice of blue and red in the clothing of the female figures highlights the symbolic charge of their roles, differentiating virtue from pleasure with masterful chromatic subtlety. One of the most intriguing elements of this painting is its connection to the medieval allegorical tradition, fused with the compositional clarity of the Renaissance. The image not only depicts a moral dilemma, but also suggests a state of introspection and personal quest, something that resonated deeply in the intellectual culture of the time. Although Raphael would later develop a grander and more dynamic style, this early work already contains the essence of his genius, the ability to endow his characters with life and psychological depth. Number 18. Madonna del Granduca, circa 1505. Around 1505, Raphael Sanzio created one of his most delicate depictions of the Virgin Mary, Madonna del Granduca, a painting that embodies purity and serenity with absolute perfection. Named after its owner in later centuries, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, this work is an outstanding example of the Renaissance ideal of beauty and balance. The Madonna appears wrapped in a dark blue cloak, holding the child with infinite tenderness, while the neutral background highlights the atmosphere of intimacy and devotion. The composition is restrained and elegant, with a focus on the relationship between mother and child, without unnecessary distractions. One of the most remarkable aspects of this work is the softness of the modeling, achieved using the sfumato technique, which Raphael probably learned from the influence of Leonardo da Vinci. The blurred contours and subtle transition of light and shadow give the figures an ethereal three-dimensionality, accentuating the sweetness of the Virgin's expression. Unlike other more elaborate Madonnas by the artist, here Raphael opts for a more intimate and restrained representation, eliminating ornamental elements to focus attention on the spirituality of the image. The luminosity of the faces and the delicacy of the details in the hands and hair demonstrate his ability to capture the essence of human beauty with unsurpassed naturalness. This work marked a crucial point in Raphael's evolution, consolidating him as one of the great masters of the Renaissance. His ability to convey emotions through simplicity and harmony was highly valued by his contemporaries and continues to captivate viewers centuries later. Curiously, Madonna del Granduca was so appreciated in its time that, according to historical accounts, it was carried with its owners on each of their trips, as if its presence provided a halo of protection and peace. Number 17. The Crucifixion Monde, from the year 1502 to the year 1503. In the early years of the 16th century, Raphael Sanzio was developing a style rooted in the Quattrocento tradition, but with a freshness and sensitivity that foreshadowed the High Renaissance. The Monde Crucifixion, commissioned by a devout family in Urbino, is a testament to this transition, where Perugino's influence is manifest in the serene symmetry and delicacy of the figures. The scene, centered on the figure of Christ on the cross, follows traditional iconography, but with a treatment of space and light that anticipates Raphael's later developments. The compositional balance, marked by the calm gestures of the Virgin, Saint John the Evangelist and the saints at the foot of the cross, generates an atmosphere of calm that contrasts with the drama of the scene. Technically, the work stands out for its refined use of oil on panel, a medium that Raphael mastered with increasing mastery. The meticulous transition of colors, with the blue skies that fade into a golden horizon, creates a depth unprecedented in the compositions of his time. The anatomy of Christ, with his elongated and perfectly modeled body, reveals Raphael's knowledge of classical sculpture and the influence of Leonardesque sfumato. The symmetry and order of the work evoke a restrained spirituality, more meditative than heartbreaking, in contrast to the cruder interpretations of other contemporary artists. The impact of the Monde crucifixion on Raphael's career is significant, as it shows the refinement of his style before he reached artistic maturity in Florence and Rome. Although the painting retains the serenity and detail of the Quattrocento, it already hints at the fluidity and harmony that would characterize his later works. It is a key piece in the artist's evolution, in which geometric balance and visual serenity begin to merge with a naturalness that would define the Renaissance ideal. The painting is known to have been in the possession of Napoleon Bonaparte, which adds an intriguing chapter to its history and underlines its relevance beyond the religious context. Number 16. Saint Catherine of Alexandria, 1507. In the middle of the 16th century, Raphael Sanzio was consolidating his style in Florence, influenced by the monumentality of Michelangelo and the softness of Leonardo da Vinci's light. It was in this context that Saint Catherine of Alexandria emerged, a work that represents the Christian martyr with a dynamism unusual in the religious figures of the Quattrocento. The composition, based on a subtle but powerful twisting movement, shows the saint in an attitude of ecstasy, with her gaze raised to heaven and a gesture of serene resignation. The background, with soft and blurred tones, contributes to the heavenly atmosphere of the painting, emphasizing the mystical character of the representation. One of the most innovative aspects of the work is the twisting of the body, a clear assimilation of the contrapposto technique, which Raphael refined to give the figure a natural grace. Leonardo's influence is evident in the treatment of the contours, where sfumato softens the transitions between light and shadow, giving the face an almost ethereal delicacy. The traditional iconography of Saint Catherine appears with her most representative attribute, the Wheel of Martyrdom, barely hinted at in the composition, demonstrating Raphael's mastery in suggesting narrative elements without overloading the scene. The fluidity of the folds in the clothing and the luminous vibration that envelops the figure accentuate the Renaissance ideal of spiritualized beauty. The painting is a clear testament to Raphael's technical mastery in his Florentine period, a crucial moment in his career that would define his artistic maturity in Rome. The subtlety of expression and compositional harmony anticipate his more monumental works in the Vatican, where he would reach his greatest splendor. In her time, Saint Catherine of Alexandria was admired for its grace and impeccable execution, characteristics that have ensured its status as one of the most refined representations of the saint. Curiously, this work has been the subject of multiple radiographic studies that revealed subtle corrections in the position of the head, evidencing the meticulous search for perfection in the painting. Number 15. Portrait of Pope Leo X with Cardinals Giulio de' Medici and Luigi de' Rossi, 1518. By the end of the second decade of the 16th century, Raphael Sanzio was the most influential artist in Rome, a patron of the papacy and with an established status at the Vatican court. Portrait of Pope Leo X with Cardinals Giulio de' Medici and Luigi de' Rossi is one of his masterpieces in the portrait genre, marking a milestone in the psychological representation of power. Unlike his earlier idealized portraits, here Raphael offers an image of raw realism, presenting the pontiff with a grave expression and an imposing presence. The composition, organized in a triangle, emphasizes the Pope's hierarchy, while the meticulous attention to detail in the robes and objects enhances the splendor of the Vatican court. The work stands out for its masterful use of chiaroscuro and rich textures. The hand of Leo X, resting on a heavy illuminated missal, suggests the symbolic weight of the Church and its intellectual power. The golden bell on the table is another element loaded with meaning, as it alludes to papal authority and the consistory ceremony. The treatment of the light, carefully distributed to emphasize the volumes of the faces and the folds of the clothing, provides a depth unprecedented in Renaissance portraiture. The interaction between the figures, with the cardinals in discreetly attentive attitudes, reinforces the feeling of an intimate moment captured with almost documentary precision. This portrait is a key piece in the evolution of the genre, as Raphael not only achieves a faithful representation of the characters, but also captures their psychology. Pope Leo X, with his thoughtful countenance and slightly bowed posture, conveys a sense of calculation and diplomacy that fits with his role in the European politics of the time. The painting was so influential that it served as a reference for numerous later portrait painters, establishing a model for official representations of authority. It is known that the work was in the private collection of the Medici for centuries, consolidating its prestige as a symbol of the alliance between art and political power in the Renaissance. Number 14. The Burial of Christ, 1507. In the late 15th and early 16th centuries, the Renaissance flourished in Italy with unprecedented splendor, and Raphael Sanzio emerged as one of the most prominent figures of this era. The Entombment of Christ, painted in 1507 AD, represents a turning point in the artist's career, who, influenced by the mastery of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, achieved a work of great drama and compositional sophistication. Inspired by the sculptural reliefs of classical antiquity and the dynamic scenes of Florentine painting, Raphael constructs a scene of profound pathos where visual narration is the central axis. In this work, the emotionality of the characters and the harmony of the composition reflect a balance between tradition and innovation, essential characteristics of his mature style. From a technical point of view, the painting is distinguished by its pyramidal composition, a device that Raphael would perfect in later works. The scene depicts a group of figures supporting the lifeless body of Christ, heading towards his tomb. The anatomical twisting of the figures and the arrangement of their gestures suggest a restrained, yet at the same time naturalistic, theatricality, evoking a feeling of genuine pain. The chromatic richness, with warm and cold tones in a harmonious combination, gives the scene a vibrant realism, while the spatial depth, achieved through the arrangement of the planes, provides an impressive three-dimensional effect. The influence of Michelangelo is evident in the musculature of the characters, while the elegance and softness of the expressions follow the line of Leonardo da Vinci. This painting not only marks the end of Raphael's time in Florence, but is also a testament to his ability to synthesize influences and elevate them to a personal level. The Entombment of Christ was commissioned by the Baglioni family of Perugia as a tribute to their deceased, adding a layer of meaning beyond the biblical scene depicted. This work would be a prelude to his monumental contribution at the Vatican, where his style would evolve into greater grandeur. Curiously, Raphael would never again tackle a subject of such dramatic intensity on this scale, thus consolidating his mastery in depicting human suffering within a framework of idealized beauty. Number 13. Portrait of Pope Julius II, from 1511 to 1512. Between 1511 and 1512 AD, Raphael Sanzio painted one of the most iconic representations of papal power, Portrait of Pope Julius II. This work arises in the context of a papacy marked by ambition and artistic renewal, at a time when the Renaissance was reaching its peak in Rome. Julius II, known as the Warrior Pope, was a patron of the arts and a political strategist who promoted the reconstruction of St. Peter's and commissioned Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel. Aware of the impact of the image in the consolidation of power, Raphael's portrait had the function not only of capturing the appearance of the pontiff, but of transmitting his authority and imposing character. Unlike conventional portraits of the period, where popes were depicted with an air of distant solemnity, Raphael introduces an innovative approach by capturing Julius II in a moment of introspection. Seated on a richly decorated throne, with his head bowed and his gaze melancholic, the pontiff seems deep in thought, which contrasts with his reputation as an energetic and combative leader. The precision in the details of the face, with pronounced wrinkles and a beard that he had grown in mourning after the loss of Bologna, provides a psychological depth unusual in portraits of the period. The coloring is another key element. The intense red of the vestments highlights the majesty of the character, while the green of the background creates a vibrant contrast that enhances the presence of the Pope. This portrait not only revolutionized papal iconography, but also influenced generations of later artists. The sobriety and naturalness with which Raphael approached the image of power set a precedent that would be taken up by artists such as Diego Velázquez in the 17th century. Furthermore, the composition became a model for official portraits of pontiffs, establishing a balance between grandeur and humanity. Curiously, this work was placed in St. Peter's Basilica to be contemplated by the faithful, an unusual fact for a papal portrait, which reinforces its impact on the public perception of the papal figure. Number 12. The Parnassus. From the year 1509 to the year 1511. Between 1509 and 1511 AD, Raphael Sanzio painted the Parnassus, one of the most emblematic works of his time at the Vatican and a manifestation of the humanist ideal of the Renaissance. This work is part of the decoration of the Stanza della Segnatura, the private library of Pope Julius II, where Raphael captured an exaltation of knowledge and the arts. In the Parnassus, poetry and music become protagonists, establishing a dialogue with philosophy and theology represented in other parts of the room. The composition takes place on the summit of Mount Parnassus, home of the god Apollo and the Muses according to classical mythology, in a scene that brings together some of the most important poets in history. From an artistic point of view, the work stands out for its visual harmony and its impeccable distribution of figures. Apollo, placed in the center, plays a golden lyre while he is surrounded by the 9 muses and a selection of poets from different periods, including Homer, Dante Alighieri, and Virgil. Raphael manages to integrate classical tradition with Renaissance sensibility by representing the characters with a naturalistic elegance and a subtle play of gestures and glances. The freshness of the colors, especially the golden and blue tones of the sky, provide an ethereal atmosphere that suggests the elevation of the spirit through art. The mastery in the use of curved perspective, adapted to the architecture of the room, demonstrates Raphael's ability to work on large-scale formats without losing delicacy in the details. Parnassus not only consolidates Raphael's reputation as a master of fresco, but also demonstrates his ability to synthesize the thought of his time into images of ideal beauty. This work, which is part of the iconographic program of the Stanza della Segnatura, establishes a symbolic connection with the School of Athens, where reason and poetry coexist in balance. Curiously, the identification of some poets in the scene has been a matter of debate for centuries, leading to multiple interpretations about Raphael's intention in including certain figures in the composition. Number 11. The Madonna del Prado, 1506. At the beginning of the 16th century, Raphael Sanzio was consolidating his prestige in the city of Florence, where his art was imbued with the elegance and balance of the Renaissance. In this context, he created La Madonna del Prado, a work in which he fused classical serenity with a dynamic and harmonious composition. In the painting, the Virgin Mary tenderly looks at the little Jesus and John the Baptist, who play with the cross in a symbolic gesture of premonition of Christ's tragic destiny. The triangular arrangement of the figures and the subtlety of the lighting reflect the influence of Leonardo da Vinci, especially in the sfumato technique, which Raphael masterfully adopted to soften the contours and give depth to the scene. This oil-on panel is distinguished by its perfect balance between naturalism and idealization, an essential characteristic of Raphael's style. The delicacy of the faces, the fluidity of the gestures, and the peaceful atmosphere are testimony to his ability to infuse humanity and spirituality into his compositions. The Madonna, dressed in shades of red and blue, stands out against the landscape background that evokes the idyllic nature of the Florentine school. The children, although depicted with great childlike sweetness, already hint at their divine destiny through their interaction with the reed cross carried by John. Each element of the work is carefully arranged to convey a sense of visual and emotional harmony. Considered one of the key pieces of Raphael's Florentine period, this painting consolidated his reputation and brought him closer to the most influential circles of the Renaissance. The masterful treatment of light and composition inspired generations of later artists. Today, the Madonna del Prado is kept at the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, where it remains a benchmark of the Renaissance ideal of beauty. A fascinating detail is the way in which Raphael managed to bring fabrics and skins to life through a subtle use of shadows, creating the illusion of movement and softness with impeccable technique. Number 10. The Madonna of the Chair, from 1513 to 1514. In the early years of the 16th century, Raphael Sanzio reached the height of his artistic maturity, developing an unmistakable style that combined technical perfection with unparalleled tenderness. It was during this period that he painted the Madonna of the Chair, one of his most iconic and appreciated works. Unlike his previous compositions, which were dominated by more obvious geometric lines, in this painting he opted for a circular structure that highlights the unity and intimacy of the scene. Mary, dressed in a richly decorated cloak, holds Jesus with a loving and protective expression, while the child, with a serene gaze, lies confidently on her lap. To one side, Saint John the Baptist, with his dark skin and rustic clothing, looks on with devotion. The mastery of color in this work is exceptional. Raphael abandons the background landscapes in favor of a more closed and enveloping composition, where the play of light and shadow shapes the forms with great naturalism. The influence of the great Venetian masters is evident in the chromatic richness and texture of the fabrics, which seem palpable thanks to the subtlety of the nuances. The deep gaze of the Virgin, full of warmth and realism, demonstrates Raphael's ability to capture the emotional essence of his characters. The circular format, unusual in his work, reinforces the feeling of closeness and family unity, making the work seem even more intimate and moving. This painting marked a turning point in Raphael's career, consolidating his reputation as a master of composition and portraiture. Admired for its balance of solemnity and tenderness, the Madonna of the Chair has influenced many later artists, who have sought to imitate the serenity and perfection of his style. Today, it is on display in the Palatine Gallery of the Pitti Palace in Florence, where it continues to captivate those who contemplate it. One detail that distinguishes it is the naturalness with which Raphael managed to capture a moment of deep maternal connection, elevating it to an image of spiritual transcendence without losing its human warmth. Number 9. La Fornarina, around 1518 and 1520. By the end of the 16th century, Raphael Sanzio was already an established artist at the papal court in Rome, where his works reflected an unsurpassed mastery in the handling of light, anatomy, and human expression. In this context, he painted La Fornarina, a fascinating portrait that moves away from his religious compositions to delve into more intimate and personal territory. It depicts a half-naked young woman, with a captivating gaze and an enigmatic expression, who has traditionally been identified as Margherita Ludi, a Roman baker and possible lover of the painter. The delicacy with which Raphael captured her beauty and the detailed modeling of her skin have made this work one of the most talked about and enigmatic of his production. The technique used in this painting is exceptional. The carefully directed light highlights the smoothness of the young woman's skin, creating an effect of softness and volume that denotes a deep knowledge of anatomy. Her relaxed pose, with her left arm covering part of her chest and her right hand resting on her lap, conveys a subtle and restrained sensuality. The turban and the jewel that adorns her head, as well as the bracelet on her left arm with the artist's signature, are details that reinforce the idea that this woman is not just a model, but someone significant in Raphael's life. The dark background contrasts with the luminosity of her skin, giving her an air of mystery and depth that has fascinated critics and viewers throughout the centuries. This work, loaded with symbolism and possible personal history, represents a different facet of Raphael, beyond his large religious and monumental commissions. The Fornarina has been the subject of countless interpretations, from considering it a portrait of love to seeing it as an idealized representation of feminine beauty at its finest. Currently, it is housed in the National Gallery of Ancient Art in Rome, where it continues to raise questions about the true identity of the model and her relationship with the painter. An intriguing detail is that recent studies have revealed modifications to the painting, such as the removal of a ring on her hand, which has further fueled speculation about the story behind this enigmatic image. Number 8. Portrait of Baldassare Castiglione, circa 1515. In the context of the 16th century, the court of Urbino represented one of the epicenters of intellectual and artistic refinement in Italy. In this setting, Raphael Sanzio immortalized Baldassare Castiglione, a distinguished humanist, diplomat, and writer whose treatise The Courtier would become an essential reference of the Renaissance. The work, executed around 1515, not only captures the elegance and intelligence of the character, but also fits into the tradition of the great psychological portraits that would redefine the genre in Western painting. The portrait, with a sober and balanced composition, stands out for its extraordinary precision in detail. The model's clothing, in dark tones and luxurious fabrics, is masterfully executed to highlight his social status without falling into excess. The neutral background, typical of the Leonardesque influence that Raphael adopted with refinement, draws attention to the character's face. Castiglione's deep gaze conveys a serenity that seems to transcend the pictorial moment, achieving a naturalism rarely seen until that moment. The soft lighting reinforces the three-dimensionality of the face, marking a turning point in the evolution of the Renaissance portrait. This work had a lasting impact on art history, influencing even later portrait painters such as Rembrandt and Velázquez, who found in it a model of introspection and expressive nobility. It is said that Titian admired it with devotion and that it influenced his way of portraying the Venetian aristocracy. Beyond its technical perfection, the painting transcends academicism to become a visual testimony to the intellectuality and courtly values of the Renaissance, where the image of the ideal man was not based only on appearance, but on the depth of his spirit. Number 7. The Triumph of Galatea, 1512. In the 16th century, mythological narratives were enthusiastically taken up again by Renaissance artists, who saw in them a perfect vehicle for expressing idealized beauty and classical values. Within this current, Raphael Sanzio created The Triumph of Galatea, one of his most vibrant and dynamic works, which captures with masterful energy the spirit of Greco-Latin antiquity. Painted in 1512 for the Villa Farnesina in Rome, this mural work depicts the triumph of the sea nymph Galatea as she escapes from the Cyclops Polyphemus, with a visual exuberance that synthesizes the grace, movement, and harmony characteristic of Renaissance painting. The composition is a marvel of dynamism and balance. Galatea is at the center, on a shell pulled by dolphins, surrounded by a whirlwind of mythological figures in full motion. Her forms are stylized, perfectly proportioned, and impeccably modeled, reflecting the influence of classical sculpture. Unlike other more narrative representations, Raphael avoids a detailed context and opts for a purely symbolic scene, the glorification of beauty and love. Galatea's pearly skin contrasts with the deep blue sky and the warm tones of the body surrounding her, achieving an exceptional chromatic vibration. This work not only represents one of the pinnacles of Renaissance fresco painting, but also reveals Raphael's ability to fuse mythology with an idealized conception of the human body. Admired by generations of artists, its influence extends into the 18th century, when neoclassicism fervently resumed its aesthetic perfection. It is said that Raphael never saw the need to paint Galatea's face from a real model, since, in his own words, her beauty was a product of the imagination, which adds an even more fascinating nuance to this masterpiece. Number 6. The Madonna Alba, circa 1510. At the beginning of the 16th century, the theme of the Madonna and Child underwent a remarkable evolution in the hands of Renaissance masters, who sought to endow these compositions with greater naturalness and expressiveness. Raphael Sanzio, in his quest for harmonic perfection, created La Madonna Alba around 1510, one of his most delicate and refined interpretations of sacred motherhood. The work, which receives its name from its belonging to the ducal family of Alba, represents the Virgin tenderly holding the infant Jesus while the infant Saint John the Baptist accompanies them in a serene landscape. The circular composition, characteristic of Raphael at this stage, gives the scene a sense of unity and visual fluidity. The arrangement of the figures creates a gentle diagonal that suggests a deep emotional bond between the characters. The modeling of the Virgin's face, of unparalleled sweetness, shows the influence of Leonardo da Vinci in the treatment of light and volume. The folds of her clothing fall naturally, enveloping the scene in an ethereal atmosphere. The color palette, dominated by soft and balanced tones, reinforces the feeling of peace that emanates from the image. This painting marks a crucial point in Raphael's career, consolidating his distinctive style in the depiction of the Virgin and establishing a canon that would be replicated and admired in the centuries that followed. Its influence on sacred art remained unchanged, serving as a reference even for the academic school of the 19th century. It is said that the symmetry and perfection in the design of this work were compared to a musical composition, reinforcing the idea that Raphael did not just paint images, but composed true visual symphonies. Number 5. The Madonna of the Goldfinch, circa 1505 and 1506. In the context of the Italian Renaissance, Raphael Sanzio emerged as a master of balance, harmony, and formal perfection. His work, The Madonna of the Goldfinch, is a testament to his technical mastery and refined artistic sensibility. Painted in the early 16th century, This composition depicts the Virgin Mary with the Christ child and Saint John the Baptist in a serene landscape bathed in a golden light that accentuates the softness of the contours. In this scene, the goldfinch held by Saint John prefigures the Passion of Christ, as the bird was associated with sacrifice and resurrection. Raphael achieves a natural and fluid interaction between the figures, displaying his mastery in the representation of idealized humanity and the delicate expression of the faces. The painting reflects the influence of Leonardo da Vinci in the pyramidal construction of the composition and the use of sfumato to soften contours, but Raphael introduces a distinctive sense of grace and sweetness. The precision in details, such as the folds of the clothing or the texture of the vegetation, demonstrates his meticulous attention to realism without sacrificing the idealization of forms. The color palette, dominated by warm and soft tones, accentuates the serenity of the scene, making each figure blend naturally into the landscape. The luminosity and aerial perspective used by the artist achieve an atmospheric depth that enriches the sense of three-dimensionality. The work is an early example of Raphael's virtuosity and one of the most obvious proofs of his ability to synthesize influences and develop a style of his own. It was created at a time when the painter was absorbing the teachings of Florence and consolidating his artistic identity. Restored in the 21st century after suffering significant damage, it is now on display at the Uffizi Gallery, where it continues to captivate those who contemplate it. Curiously, its restoration allowed the discovery of hidden layers of paint that revealed original details lost over time, proving that even masterpieces still hold secrets. Number 4. The Marriage of the Virgin, 1504. Within the artistic panorama of the 16th century, the painting The Marriage of the Virgin marks a crucial point in the career of Raphael Sanzio. Created when the artist was barely 21 years old, this work already demonstrated his extraordinary ability for composition, the use of perspective and the representation of the human figure with naturalness and harmony. Inspired by a previous work by Perugino, his teacher, Raphael introduced innovations that went beyond the rigidity of the original model and gave the scene greater dynamism and depth. The work illustrates the moment when Joseph places the ring on the finger of the Virgin Mary, surrounded by a series of characters that reinforce the solemnity of the moment. One of the most striking aspects is the use of perspective, with a central architectural structure that opens up in the background and generates an impeccable effect of depth. The precision in the arrangement of the figures and the use of vanishing lines make the viewer's eye move naturally towards the circular temple, which functions as the visual and symbolic axis of the composition. The chromatic balance and the delicacy in the representation of the faces reflect the refinement of the young Raphael, who had already mastered the principles of symmetry and proportion. This work, which marked the culmination of his apprenticeship in Umbria and his transition to the style that would make him one of the most influential figures of the Renaissance, is notable for its freshness and narrative precision. Today, it is housed in the Pinacoteca di Brera in Milan, where it remains a benchmark of Renaissance classicism. In an interesting twist, technical analysis has revealed that Raphael adjusted several details during execution, suggesting that he was honing his vision in the process, a characteristic of great painting geniuses. Number 3. The Transfiguration, from the year 1516 to the year 1520. During the last years of his life, Raphael Sanzio worked on the Transfiguration, considered his artistic testament and one of the most ambitious works of the Renaissance. Commissioned by Cardinal Giulio de' Medici for the Narbonne Cathedral, this painting represents the culmination of Raphael's genius in the synthesis of drama, lighting, and movement. Its structure is divided into two planes. The upper part, where the transfigured Christ floats in a heavenly glow accompanied by Moses and Elijah, and the lower part, where the apostles and a crowd attempt to cure a possessed child. This contrast between divine light and human struggle symbolizes the duality between the earthly and the heavenly. The bold composition breaks with the balanced serenity of his earlier works, introducing an emotional intensity that is heightened by the use of dynamic diagonals and contrasting lighting, reinforcing its iconic status. Today, it is housed in the Vatican museums and is considered one of the most influential works in the history of art. Over time, studies have been carried out on the work that reveal corrections in the arrangement of the figures and adjustments in the lighting, evidencing Raphael's perfectionism until his final days. In an irony of fate, this painting not only marked the end of his life, but also became the ultimate proof of his unparalleled talent. Number 2. The Sistine Madonna, 1512. Painted in the 16th century for the Church of San Sixto in Piacenza, the Sistine Madonna represents one of the most sublime moments of Marian iconography in the history of art. Raphael achieves a perfect balance between solemnity and sweetness, presenting the Virgin Mary as a heavenly yet accessible figure, enveloped in an atmosphere of mysticism and serenity. The composition is singular for its bold spatial arrangement, in which the Madonna and Child emerge from an ethereal background of clouds, surrounded by the solemn presence of Pope Sixtus II and Saint Barbara. At the foot of the scene, the two contemplative cherubs have become one of the most reproduced motifs in Western art, and dynamic style. Over the centuries, this painting has transcended its religious context to become a cultural and artistic icon. After its transfer to Dresden in the 18th century, it became one of Raphael's most influential works, admired for its formal perfection and ability to convey spirituality without resorting to excessive artifice. Even the little cherubs have acquired a reputation of their own, being reproduced on a multitude of media, from postcards to sculptures, demonstrating the work's lasting impact on the public sensibility. Number 1. The School of Athens, from 1509 to 1511. Located in the Stanza della Segnatura of the Apostolic Palace in the Vatican, the School of Athens represents one of the crowning works of the Italian Renaissance and a testament to Raphael's technical and conceptual mastery. Commissioned by Pope Julius II in the context of the Vatican's artistic reform, this mural painting symbolizes the synthesis of classical thought and humanism that characterized the 16th century, highlighting the greatest figures of Greek philosophy in a majestic architectural space. The arrangement of the characters and the depth achieved in the central perspective make the work a perfect example of Renaissance mastery in the representation of space and form. The compositional structure of the work is based on symmetry and balance, with a linear perspective that converges at the central point, where Plato and Aristotle, the two most influential figures of ancient philosophy, meet. Raphael, influenced by the teachings of Bramante and Leonardo da Vinci, creates an architecture inspired by the Pantheon in Rome, in which arches and vaults frame the scene with classical monumentality. The diversity of gestures, postures, and expressions of the philosophers, mathematicians, and astronomers reflects the richness of human knowledge and the ability of painting to represent abstract ideas with visual clarity. This work not only established Raphael as one of the greatest artists of his time, but also left a legacy that influenced generations of later painters. In a gesture of bold creativity, the artist included his own self-portrait in the scene, establishing a link between the past and the present, and paying homage to the perpetuity of knowledge. His ability to integrate classical references with technical innovations of the Renaissance has made this painting studied and admired to this day, transcending its decorative function to become a symbol of the humanist ideal. Thank you for watching our video. Subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Give it a like, comment your thoughts, and share this video with your friends and family.